Good evening to you, our viewers, readers, and listeners. Joining us live on Zimai. We're just checking here how things are. Today is the day. Finally. Hmm, just checking here. Okay. Thank you very much. Good evening to you, our viewers, readers, and listeners. Right. Today is finally the extraordinary summit, the Sadc Extraordinary Summit. And this is the summit that discusses the just ended 2023 elections of Zimbabwe. And today we have on the panel here a respected Zimbabwe community leader in South Africa, Nabuto Mabena. Good evening to you, sir.
Evening to you and to the viewers.
Oh, wonderful. And it's great to have you tonight. And I'm hoping that we're going to learn a few perspectives from the ground where you are in South Africa. I know you've done quite a lot of work there with the government of South Africa, and I'm sure these regional interventions you have been here and there over the years. So quickly,
Thank you so much.
Wonderful. So we're going to be starting straight away here, and Wilbert, good evening to you.
Good evening to you. Good evening, Mr. Mabena, and good evening to the listeners. And thanks for inviting me along.
Oh, thank you, sir. And we've got someone who's just joined us. I'm not sure. Is this gentleman from the newsroom? I'm wondering. Ben, are you from the newsroom?
No, I'm just a guest.
Oh, I see. Oh, you got the link from, I presume you got it from the newsroom forum, right?
Yes.
Oh, I see. Wonderful. So you can come in later on and you can pass some comments.
All right, thank you.
Wonderful. Well, shall we start straight away with Mr. Mabena? Mr. Mabena, I would like to ask you, just give us your overview. Is this a eureka moment? And what are we likely to see from this Sadc summit?
Well, I saw that the Sadc summit will be discussing the Sadc Observer Mission election report. We now all know what the report said. It said the elections were not free and fair. So the Troika should discuss, take a position. Is going to depend on whether they adopt the report from the observer team, which then, as we understand, they have to pass it to the SADC heads of state. So if the Troika were to adopt that report, it then presents serious challenges to the government of Zimbabwe on how it is going to proceed, because the guidelines are clear on holding free and fair elections in terms of the SADC guidelines. So if the elections were not held under those guidelines, then there are serious problems. What I did not check, which my colleague might assist, is to saying if elections are not held under the guidelines, what are the penalties? What happens? Is there a rerun? Can SADC call for a rerun of the election? Would they follow the line of President Cyril Ramaphosa, who was saying in New York that on the sidelines of the UN, that there are mistakes in every country in terms of holding elections, and also listening to former President Thabo Mbeki, where he was basically talking of some kind of inclusive government. But of course, the agenda of what that we saw is also loaded with the issues that has to do with the Democratic Republic of Congo. But what is interesting, though, is that the president of the Democratic Republic of Congo is not was challenging Kabila, who since 2001 Zimbabwe has been friends, or say the ruling party has been friends with the Kabila. But now with a new president that is in place, so would not know what his views would be in a closed meeting.
Right, thank you very much. But before we get to Wilbert, I just want to ask you, you have been a leader in the Zimbabwe community in South Africa. And I do recall, if I'm not mistaken, throughout the 2007 and 2008 to 2009 GNU period, you were also you were a leader even back then, right?
Yes.
So tell me, comparing Zimbabwe today and back then, are we seeing right now a real decisive punchline by Sadc that's likely to cause something of the authoritative Changirai GNU nature or level of force? Or, yeah.
Like I'm saying, you now have a new political leadership in Sadc. We know that President Mbeki was close to President Mugabe, the late, dating back to the liberation struggle, particularly around 1979, when he was making a proposal to the ANC that they needed to dump the alliance with the ZAPU but join ZANU. And we also know that President Mbeki was one of the few people that immediately visited then Prime Minister Mugabe in Harare after his inauguration in 1980. So ever since they cultivated this leadership, and President Mbeki was seen as a person that was shielding President Mugabe. Now you have the president of Zambia, who is seen to be closer to the opposition than to the ruling party. So this is why there's this expectation that the report from the Troika, which the president of Zambia actually chairs, is not going to be good to ZANU-PF. They are likely to make a recommendation to affirm that indeed elections were not held free and fair. But like I'm saying, I'll be speculating on whether what are the likely penalties if then Troika says the elections were not held in a free and fair environment. What is it that they are then going to recommend to SADC heads of state? Are they going to recommend what President Mbeki was talking about, like what you are saying in 2008, when the global political agreement was signed in 15 September, or they are going to say, we do not recognize the elections in Zimbabwe, let's have a rerun. And if that happens, I'm not sure how this is going to be handled, because the question is, if assuming there was a rerun, ZEC itself is discredited. So who's going to then manage the elections in Zimbabwe? Can SADC manage elections of another country? We always talk of sovereignty. So will it going to happen? We also need to borrow some notes from Lesotho. What was the role of SADC when there were military concerns in Lesotho? And eventually a new prime minister was elected in Lesotho. So those are some of the examples that we should look on how SADC has dealt with these issues.
Right. Oh, thank you very much. Hubert, we'll switch to you here. And I know you've got a lot to ask Mabena because you've been a critic for a very long time. Right. Shoot, sir.
Well, regarding this SADC summit, I think some of us have been waiting for it. And I'm really glad that it has finally taken place, because we really need to move on. We can't just be uncertain forever. And so the fact that it has taken place, and like what Mabena is saying there, we don't know yet what their decision has been, but personally, I hope they are going to uphold the SADC election observer mission's report, which condemned the Zimbabwe elections as a farce. So I think once that is done, I don't know, maybe whether they can now make a decision on that, or they need the whole of SADC to make a decision on that, how to proceed. But in this particular case, it really is more a situation where the AU has also condemned those elections. All the observers to those elections have also condemned the election process that took place. So it's really difficult to see how Sadc can try to wriggle out of this one. I agree with Mabena there that when President Cyril Ramaphosa was commenting on these elections when he was in New York last week, he wanted to suggest that the so-called flaws and irregularities were just challenges, which is completely misreading that report. And his own former colleague, President Thabo Mbeki, made it very clear in his comment as well that the report from the Sadc and the AU were very clear that the process was so flawed they could not produce a legitimate result. This has happened before, as we all know, and therefore then we cannot pretend that we don't know what the consequences are. Yes, Sadc may want to go through down the same route of the GNU. From what I've heard on the social media, they've given ZANU-PF and Chamisa 3 options. The number 1 option being these fresh elections, and they'll be supervised by Sadc and the UN. Personally, I dismiss that point completely because that is not taking Zimbabwe anywhere. We have been having rigged elections ever since 1980. And we really need to address this problem. We had the opportunity to do so during the last GNU. We wasted it. And now to go straight into fresh elections and with the supervision of Sadc and the UN. What about if the by-election, the following month after that, there is a by-election? Are we going to call Sadc again? Because like everybody knows, the system is so corrupt that you cannot seriously expect with just supervising one election will cure it. It's not going to cure it. The same Sadc will be back, the same prejudiced police and the judiciary and so forth will be back. So what have we done except kicking the can down the road? The second option, which is this National Transition Authority, which will compose ZANU-PF, CCC, and the civic society, I don't like it. Because if you have got ZANU-PF and CCC as 1/3, 1/3, they will be the dominant group there. And if they fail to implement even one meaningful reform during the 2008 to 2013 GNU, we can be certain that they will not implement any reforms now. And the third option is a GNU composing those 2 parties. Again, I think it's a waste of time because we are just recreating what we had in 2008 to 2019. They didn't implement any reforms. The best we can expect them to do now is implement some token reforms. And then we are back to where we were again. I think we should bite the bullet and demand the fourth option, in my view, should be that we have the National Transition Authority where individuals are appointed on their competence and their commitment to implementing the democratic reforms, period. And we should not try to appease ZANU-PF and CCC. That will be missing the point completely.
But, people want to know from both of you, from your experience, particularly Mabena, what will bring that shift? Is it an instruction from Sadc that Mnangagwa and Chamisa need to go to the drawing board? Or it is Mnangagwa and Chamisa doing it on their own based on the recommendations? Or Chamisa making the demands? What really makes, because you see, people want to know, there's need to be clarity there. How will, because people want change. When people went to vote, it was for change. Now that they see a SADC report has been done, right? They want to see change. They don't want to hear jargon in their heads. So tell me.
You see, my brother Simba, the issue here, it's deeper than the election itself, because Zimbabwe is a deep state, which is militaristic in character. So the question that we're confronted with is, how do you dismantle a deep state? Can you dismantle a deep state through an election? Can those that rolled military tanks in November 2017 simply hand over power to anyone? This is the burning question which all of us must confront. So this is why some of us are saying, in order to begin to dismantle the deep state, while my brother does not agree with the government of national unity, I do not think that what he suggests as point number 4 is practical in terms of implementing it. Because remember, we have a history. When we emerged from the Bush War, we were placed under an administration of Lord Soames, who then conducted elections because we're coming from a colonial state to build a new state, what was said to be a democratic state. So we're under Lord Soames. But I do not think that 43 years after independence, in a country where there's no war at this stage, will Sadc take a position, then instruct? What Sadc can do, in our view, is that it can make recommendations. And the recommendations which are practical is to say, because you want to dismantle a deep state, you need people that will then go to government, in a government of national unity, who understand the class nature of the Zimbabwean state. My brother says we made lots of mistakes in 2009 to 2013. Fortunately enough, I was part of the Joint Monitoring and Implementation Commission Committee, JOMIC. I was deployed in Matabeleland South. I had to relocate from South Africa to Zimbabwe to work for JOMIC. And what we achieved in the 2013 elections as part of the JOMIC teams that were deployed in all 10 provinces was that the 2013 election was held in some environment which was not violent, because we would address gatherings in communities, rural communities, urban areas, where the 3 parties that were represented in government will be sending their representatives to address those. What we failed to break was the distribution of food, which is distributed, and the farming inputs, which is distributed from ZANU-PF head office. But in terms of violence, we're able to deal with that. We're not tactical also in handling the Home Affairs Ministry. Remember, there were co-ministers of Home Affairs, the police and the civil. So we were not able to deal with those. So we might have, which I agree entirely with my brother, that we then got those packs, and then we forgot, and we thought that we were going to win. And it's also important to visit the Sadc summit of Maputo in 2013, where the report by President Zuma then was a recommendation to say you should not go to an election without agreeing in the implementation of the electoral reforms. What then became problematic, which Sadc could not overrule, was that some funny guy that just stood up, went to court, and they said the President Mugabe must declare or pronounce the date of elections. And Sadc was then saying, now that there's a court case, we can't go against the Zimbabwe judiciary. So it then, because everyone was saying, let's extend the date of elections, that was in 2013, so that we implement all these reforms. But because now there was a court judgment which said elections, I think it should have been held on the 31st of July, which then eventually happened. So we lost that again. So, and I'm just wondering, on how the heads of states, when King Mswati, who's to hold elections in the coming days, who does not allow political parties, Pudemo, Communist Party of Swaziland, and the other political parties are banned in Swaziland. There's no political activity in Swaziland. It's an Tinkundla system, which all of us are calling for the dismantling of that Tinkundla system. So you can't then expect King Mswati, who's a key member of Sadc, to then denounce Zimbabwe. I'm not very sure. like I'm saying, it might lead to some kind of speculation. And also, the last point, we must take seriously. We might dismiss, some might dismiss the Secretary General of the ANC as someone who's just who's a motor mouth. But we must listen to the issues which he's raising, which of course the African National Congress is making a fundamental mistake. Because the mistake that they are making is that Zimbabwe is a victim of imperialist forces. It is not true. They forget, or they do not want to come to the reality that there is a looting class in Zimbabwe, and that Zimbabwe is a deep state. So we are not victims of imperialist forces in Zimbabwe. And Mbalula then, with the rest of the liberation movements, will then carry this view to say, let us protect. So you are likely then possible to see the convening of former liberation movements before this Sadc Heads of State of Summit, if, as we expect, that the Troika will then affirm or adopt the report of the observer team.
Uber, tell us, in your view, what really strikes here?
Well,
what can bring the change? That's what people want to know.
I've got to agree with Mabena that Zimbabwe is a deep state. The army's role in Zimbabwe has been a dominant one. There's no denying that. But I think Mabena will also agree that when you look at the 2008 to 2013 GNU, the army did not do anything to stop Morgan Tsvangirai and his colleagues implementing even one token reform. The army played no role in that. You know, so we cannot keep blaming the army as being powerful, too powerful. Yes, maybe if they try to implement the reforms and the army was finding it very difficult to accept that and they stepped in, that's different. But in this case here, they did not. And I agree with what he is also saying that in 2013, Sadc had a special summit in Maputo in which they advised the MDC, led by Morgan Tsvangirai, not to participate in those elections without at least the electoral reforms being implemented. And initially, ZANU-PF agreed to that, according to Ibo Mandaza, who was at that summit. And then when they got to Harare, what Mabena is explaining there happened. You know, this Mawarire took it to court and so forth. But actually what clinched that decision is the fact that Patrick Chinamasa, who was the Minister of Justice and Parliamentary Affairs, turned around and said, Sadc is saying we must implement reforms before we hold the elections. He turned around and said, what reforms? There are no outstanding reforms in Parliament. I am the Minister of Justice and Parliamentary Affairs. There are no outstanding reforms we are supposed to implement. Are we talking of proposing reforms now and then implementing them? And then when that was clear, everybody could turn around and say, well, okay, you cannot postpone elections on the basis of reforms that you have not even proposed. So the problem there was MDC had not submitted any reform proposals. And on that basis, you cannot justify postponing elections. What will clinch this present situation, in my view, is if Sadc was to accept that the 2008-2013 GNU failed to implement meaningful reforms. And they, as Sadc, were the front and accept, okay, in this case here, they have got to accept their limitations. Let's invite somebody else, the UN, for instance. And then it will be Sadc, maybe in conjunction with the UN, who are now coming to Zimbabwe and saying, how are we going to move this situation? I think that will be important, because then they can start telling ZANU-PF that we cannot keep on having this situation where we go into another GNU and at the end of it, no meaningful reforms are implemented and we are back to square one again. That situation cannot be acceptable, because
Right. So in short, Wilbert, what you're saying is you're saying that Sadc can issue an instruction or can take a position, and then Sadc pushes for a change where an intervention, where the UN will be involved, right?
No, I think in this particular case, Sadc, as a regional body, can go to, in fact, in this case, it's not me who mentioned it first time. Even these elections, if they're going to be held immediately, they've said Sadc, with the help of the UN, will help organize those meetings, those elections. So Sadc can invite the UN, because the UN has got more manpower and more experience. And let's face it, the UN has been playing a key role in these elections.
While you're there, Mr. Mabena, is that plausible, or this is wishful desires?
I do not think that Sadc will instruct Zimbabwe. What Sadc might do, is likely to do, is to encourage Zimbabweans to have dialogue. This is exactly what President Mbeki was saying. I do not think that Sadc will then take over the running of the elections in Zimbabwe to an extent that they invite either AU or UN to run elections. I do not think that is going to be possible. I've already explained the reasons. Zimbabwe remains a sovereign state. So I do not think that it is going to happen. So the best out of this.
So what's the difference? What's the difference? Sorry for cutting you. So what's the difference then between the new Sadc and the previous Sadc? Because that's exactly what Ramaphosa and them Crop did.
It then now speaks to the opposition itself, right? Because if the opposition failed to implement the reforms, you cannot then blame anyone else other than the opposition itself. Because one point, my brother, that we are not really discussing what is the class character of the opposition, and want to submit that. One thing that is ZANU-PF-led government has done successfully in the last 43 years is to build a strong intelligence network. So it is possible that even the new members of parliament that were elected, some of them might be state agents who might then find themselves in government. And you can't then expect such individuals to implement reforms. So when my brother speaks of the opposition failing to implement those key reforms, the question should be, why did it fail? I said maybe we got caught up in the perks that were provided. People are now ministers having bodyguards and so forth, and we took our eyes off the ball. It is likely that it might happen, but I think we need to rethink to say, if you have a government of national unity, you can then begin to agree at the very least with the assistance of Sadc on some reforms. But I do not think that Sadc will take charge of the Zimbabwe elections. But we'll wait and see what will then happen.
The class culture, you said the class nature or the class culture of the opposition?
The class nature, because remember, the opposition the opposition since 2000, rightly or wrongly, has always been accused as a front of white interest, as a stooges of imperialist forces. And the likes of Mbalula in the ANC and the others, they are seeing the change that happened in Zambia in 1991, where then Chuluba came into power, to say after Zambia, Zimbabwe was next, and South Africa is next, Namibia is next. So there's this belief within the broader former liberation movements in the region to say there's an attack on the liberation movements to say remove ZANU-PF from power, remove ANC, remove SWAPO, and so forth and so forth. So they are then taking this position to defend. This is why even in 2018, the ANC, through its then chair of the international relations, Comrade Lindwe Zulu, was in Harare, where she came out clearly that they were defending a ZANU-PF, they were in solidarity with the ZANU-PF, notwithstanding that you have thousands and thousands of Zimbabweans that flocked to South Africa. And this is the same message that the Secretary General of the ANC was saying. But the following morning, you are told by the ANC itself that migrants must be deported, particularly from Zimbabwe. You now have to build put some technology around the borderline in Bedford to prevent Zimbabweans from coming to South Africa. So you have a crisis in Zimbabwe, a crisis which is man-made, a crisis which is blamed on the doorstep of ZANU-PF. Not that we are victims of imperialist forces. No, we are not victims of imperialist forces. We are the victims of the looting class in Zimbabwe, and the ZANU-PF must be called to order to say, if you continue doing this, we have a crisis, because the ANC might actually hit below 50% because of the migration question that is getting topical in South Africa. And why is this migration question so topical? Is because the ZANU-PF will never rebuild the economy. Some of us do not believe in miracles. So whether if you defend ZANU-PF, you must know that then Zimbabweans simply flock to South Africa. And we have seen what then creates these fights that are happening. You now have a vigilante Tutula, Operation Tutula, now saying they are turning themselves into a political party.
Wow. So it is a class war then. There are classes here, social classes fighting each other, and the people are the masses are the victims.
Is the failure to characterize the nature of the Zimbabwean problem by the ANC. The problem, which is key, is the looting class. They are looting. And we continue saying we now have a dynasty where the president appoints the family members. There is no clear vision in rebuilding the economy. They might be talking about the Vision 2030. There's no vision. What is there? It is just to loot. And when you loot, what happens to us ordinary Zimbabweans? People then leave Zimbabwe and go to neighboring countries, particularly South Africa. So the ANC and the former liberation movements have failed to understand the nature of the crisis in Zimbabwe. There's a new president in Angola. He might be different from the rest, because the ruling party in Angola is now kind of undergoing some reforms. We've seen how he dealt with the Dos Santos family. So he might then insist that we have the guidelines on holding democratic elections, and we must stick to those guidelines. But like I said, is that I am not sure at this stage what are the penalties if Sadc says you did not hold elections under the guidelines, and we do not think that you are capable of holding your own elections. And I'm sure that this is what everyone wants, that Sadc will take a resolution, and that Zimbabwe is not capable of holding its own elections, which is then the point that my brother is raising to say, let's then have Sadc running elections, inviting United Nations to assist the Sadc in running elections, where the people of Zimbabwe then elect leadership of their choice.
Well, you know, we need to round down, folks. Our 30 minutes is literally exhausted. But quickly, is Zimbabwe going to be a safe country? In your last remarks, as you're closing down here, Today, we've just had a situation where Mnangagwa announced Virginia Mabiza, who is reportedly related to him in a very, very strong way. And I just had to use that reference there. And then also just yesterday, he appointed his cousin, Rushwaya, to replace Robert Mugabe's chief secretary, Meshek Sibanda. And this is in addition to his children, his many children who are now in cabinet. How many are there, by the way? We know at least 2, but there are 2 others who are informal. So 4. And then we have now Virginia Mabiza and then Rushwaya. Okay, but in cabinet there are 4. Yeah, so these influential posts. And by the way, also, other posts here which are now occupied by the Mnangagwa family. The State House residence is now directed by Auxilia's brother, who is a convicted armed robber. So when I look at all these things, my question is, as I'm asking all of you, as you're rounding up, you're giving us your closing remarks, is Zimbabwe going to be a safe country, or Zimbabwe is probably morphing into a United Arab Emirates type of style of leadership where it's authoritarian, right? But yet it is progressive. Might be authoritarian like Saudi Arabia, but in terms of economic growth and other things here, where are we going? Maybe I could start with Wilbert. Wilbert, give us your rounding, 1 minute, and then 1 minute, Mavena, Wisha.
Well, as for making progress, Zimbabwe is not making any progress at all. We have seen in the last 5 years, or ever since Mnangagwa,
They're not going to agree with you.
they've been a serious looting, so I don't think it is being realistic. But I think whatever appointments that Mnangagwa is doing, if this Sadc Troika meeting upheld the Sadc election observer mission report, and they said, no, we must uphold that, I think that Sadc will find itself in a very increasingly difficult position to ignore that. I agree with Mabena that ANC has made a complete U-turn. The ANC that was in the GNU of 2008 to 2013 is a totally different animal from the ANC that is there now. They are now looking at the situation where they don't want a regime change in Zimbabwe because they believe that if there was to be a regime change in Zimbabwe and the economy was to pick up, and look at the mess South Africa is in, it's not yet a failed state, but it's on its way to become the latest failed state in Africa. South Africans themselves, particularly when you think that they've got free, fair, and credible elections, would want regime change. And that is one thing that ANC will find very difficult to fight against if the there was regime change in Zimbabwe and the economy was picking up. So that is one of the reasons why South Africa would have wanted to retain ZANU-PF at all costs. But I think even South Africa is finding it very difficult now, given the report from Sadc and the AU. They cannot ignore it. We have seen the line of questioning that President Cyril Ramaphosa was getting from the opposition and fellow South Africans for his supporting and propping up ZANU-PF. And the last thing you would want is to go into the election at the time when the Zimbabwe economy is getting worse and worse and the pressure on the border to get back into South Africa is increasing. This issue of they will beef up security at Bedbridge, forget it. There are many other ways of getting into South Africa. You can go via Mozambique, you can go via Botswana, you can go via Namibia. So as people get desperate, there will be more and more Zimbabweans escaping Zimbabwe to go to South Africa. ANC will have to face that reality. And I agree with Mabena that they are going to increase their measures to counteract that. And it's not going to be helpful.
Well, gents, we are just about to round, and I think Chief Jose has just joined us here. Chief Jose, maybe you'll be giving us your closing remarks. Is Zimbabwe going to be safe? Before Mr. Mabena chips in here, is Zimbabwe going to be a safe country? And what's likely to happen after all these appointments that we have seen just now?
Obviously, Zimbabwe is not a safe place. Mnangagwa has made Zimbabwe a very unsafe place because of his actions or inactions, but of course, largely due to the stolen election. And until that issue is resolved, nothing will move in Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe would not be a place of choice, a place where anyone wants to live. So what I can just say, Simba, is the issue of legitimacy, the issue of the stolen elections has to be resolved first before we can talk about anything in Zimbabwe. And I can assure you that it is going to be resolved. And we are still going to see a new great Zimbabwe very soon. A lot is happening. A new great Zimbabwe is Lord.
Well, thank you very much. Mr. Mabena, this is your shot now, your last one.
Well,
Is this really assurance? Do you find this to be assuring?
Well, I do not think so. I do not think so. But of course, some of us who are talking as outsiders who do not know what is happening inside the Triple C. Who are they talking to? And they have the direct line to the president in Zambia. He might be giving them more information than what we get in public media. So it's difficult for us then to make any meaningful contribution to such a discussion. But I wanted to return to the question that you asked about Mnangagwa surrounding himself with the family members and so forth in cabinet, in key state institutions. This is what a cultist leader does, because Mnangagwa knows that at some point he will not be president of Zimbabwe. He wants to secure his family. He might want to do a carbon on us, where the Bongo family was in power for about 57 years. So Mnangagwa might be preparing his own children to take over from him, particularly the one who is said to be in the military, not the ones that are deputy ministers. So that's what some of us think that Mnangagwa is trying to do. He was able to convince ZANU-PF that at its Congress, you only elect one person, and that is him. He then appoints the entire Central Committee. So when you have a formal liberation movement that goes to Congress, it does not elect its leaders. It only elects one leader, or simply agree to have one leader as the head of the party. Then everyone gets appointed. So what then happens is that everyone in ZANU-PF then simple tries to get attention of the president, because whatever these appointments that Mnangagwa is making is not being challenged inside ZANU-PF. It is different from the ANC, where the ANC will sit and they decide, make recommendations to the head of state in South Africa to say, these are the people that you should appoint into cabinet. This is not what is happening in ZANU-PF. And then, as I conclude, ZANU-PF has never had a democratic transition inside ZANU-PF since 1963. Ndabaningi Sithole was not removed correctly in terms of their constitution. We know what then happened to Mugabe. We know how Mnangagwa grabbed the power. Can we then expect that a party that has never had a democratic transition in itself can then allow for a democratic transition from ZANU-PF to the opposition? We do not think so.
Well, gents, thank you so much. This has been a discussion. Unfortunately, Chief Shusha came a bit late. It would have been good if you were around, Chief. Then we could have, had a bit more of interaction around this topic here. I can see some people have been saying we want to join the discussion, but you're coming late. That's a problem. We started on time, and we only had 30 minutes, by the way, and we've already gone beyond. But I'm sure we can still converge here tomorrow and continue this Sadc issue. Tomorrow is going to be on another level, because I'm sure tomorrow we will now know what the elements of discussion, or the deliberations inside the extraordinary summit today were. So do come back tomorrow, 7 p.m. British time, and jump in. Thank you, Honorable Mtodi. We've been screaming your comments there. And Courage Shati says Zimbabwe needs to fight. Sorry, needs to unite around this time to fight this ZANU-PF nonsense. Then Gloria K says, how could they give one person power? Now they beg him to get positions. Right. Daniel Gurija, would you come into the inbox, please, and then we can connect you for tomorrow, 7 p.m. Is that okay? Well, gents, thank you very much. Chief, thank you. Mr. Mabena, it's been awesome.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Let's meet on the other side. Maybe by tomorrow we'll be having a new government.
Okay, good night.
Chief.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Government
Coming.
Yeah.
Zimbabwe is coming.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, folks.
Thank you. Thank you, Simba.
Yes.